Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. We have an incredibly profound mission for this conversation today. One that is custom tailored for you, the listener, wherever you happen to be tuning in from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to be analyzing this really staggering set of verses from Surah Ad-Dukhan, specifically verses 25 through 29, and we're going to be looking at them alongside classical hadith and the really rich, extensive commentary of Sunni Islamic scholars.
It's just a deeply transformative set of verses to unpack. I mean, we are not just exploring historical accounts or, distant chronicles here. We are stepping into this highly sophisticated theological paradigm that really challenges the very foundation of how we view our entire lives.
It really does. And just to set up the hook for you, I want you to think about how obsessed our modern world is with this concept of legacy.
Right.
Like, we're just bombarded from every single direction with this immense pressure to build empires.
Oh, constantly. Hustle culture, right.
Right. To accumulate real estate, to, secure massive investment portfolios, to leave our names plastered on the side of a hospital wing or like a university building. It is this absolute obsession with permanence.
Yeah, leaving your mark.
Exactly, leaving your mark. But this deep dive, based on the sources we've compiled, it turns that entire concept completely on its head. We're exploring the ultimate existential question here, which is, what are you actually leaving behind when you're gone?
And that is the core of it, because the framework we're examining today dictates that the heavens and the earth, they are not just, they aren't empty, passive backdrops to your life. They are conscious, reactive witnesses to your spiritual footprint.
Wow.
Yeah. They are literally observing what you cultivate. They feel your presence, and they will actually react to your absence.
Okay, wait. I want to pause right there because conscious, reactive witnesses. That is a massive claim. And I know that you get into the actual mechanics of how the universe does that. But to understand the sheer gravity of these verses, we kind of have to start with where and when they were revealed, right?
Like a context.
Yeah. Our sources point us to this localized famine in Mecca, thousands of years ago. And I'm trying to connect the dots here. Like, how does a starvation event in a desert valley serve as the launch pad for understanding something as massive as cosmic legacy?
Well, to bridge that gap, we really have to immerse ourselves in what the scholars call the asbab al-nuzul.
Which is the context of Revelation, right?
Exactly, the socio-historical context of the revelation. Because if we don't understand the audience, we won't understand the immense rhetorical power of the words. So we are looking at the middle to late Meccan period, and this was arguably one of the darkest, most incredibly difficult times for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the early community of believers.
Just a brutal time.
Completely. The tribal elite of the Quraysh, they weren't just, politely disagreeing with the message. They were ruthlessly persecuting the Muslims.
And when you say persecution, I mean, we're not just talking about social media cancellation or bad press, right? We are talking about severe physical and economic realities.
Utterly severe. I mean, we are talking about economic strangulation, physical torture of the most vulnerable believers, and a complete systemic social boycott. The Quraysh literally forced the Muslims into a barren ravine, the Shib Abi Talib.
They just pushed them out of society entirely.
Yeah, cutting off all trade, all food supplies, all social interaction. I mean, the classical sources say the cries of starving children could be heard echoing out of the valley. It was a methodical, ruthless attempt to erase the community.
God, it's horrifying to even think about. And in the face of that overwhelming systemic cruelty, the Prophet, peace be upon him, made a very specific supplication, didn't he?
He did. Seeing the absolute obstinacy and the arrogance of the Quraysh elite, he prayed for a drought. He specifically asked Allah for years of famine similar to the 7 years of severe drought that occurred during the time of Prophet Yusuf, or Joel.
Right, the famous 7 lean years.
Exactly. And that prayer was answered. The famine that struck Mecca was catastrophic. The classical sources describe a situation so utterly bleak that the very people who had orchestrated the boycott against the Muslims were now reduced to consuming carrion.
Dead animals.
Dead animals, yeah. And literally chewing on old bones and pieces of leather just to survive.
I really want you to just pause on that visual for a second. Think about the elite of Mecca. Like, these were the billionaires of their time.
The absolute top of the food chain.
Right? The people who prided themselves on their immense wealth, their monopolies over the winter and summer trade routes, their absolute supremacy in the Arabian Peninsula. And now, They're literally digging in the dirt for rotting bones. That is a staggering collapse of status. I mean, it strips away every ounce of human dignity they thought their money could buy.
It is a total brutal leveling of the playing field. And this physical devastation, it brings us to the very name of the surah we are discussing today, which is Ad-Dukhan.
The smoke.
Right, the smoke. The starvation became so intense, the physical exhaustion so profound, and the deprivation of nutrients so severe that their physiology began to break down. Their vision actually began to blur.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so when the starving Meccans looked up at the sky, they literally saw a smoke, a dark, hazy mirage hanging between them and the heavens.
So wait, the smoke wasn't like a forest fire or a weather vent. It was a physiological reaction to their bodies basically eating themselves from starvation.
Well, so this is where we find a really fascinating synthesis in the classical Sunni scholarship. Because there is a robust debate about the exact nature of this Dukhan.
Okay, what are the different views?
So on one hand, you have highly respected companions and scholars like Abdullah ibn Masud and later Ibn Kathir, who strongly assert that this smoke was exactly what we just
A
described.
physiological reaction.
Exactly. The historical physical manifestation of the Meccan famine severely impairing their vision. It was a tangible consequence of their arrogance.
But there's another camp of scholars who view it differently, right?
Yes, there is. If you look at transmissions from other heavyweights in the exegetical tradition, like Al-Tabari and Al-Qurtubi, they argue that the Dukhan refers primarily to a massive eschatological sign.
Meaning a sign of the end of times, like an apocalyptic event.
Precisely. A literal cosmic smoke that will envelop all of humanity right before the Day of Judgment, causing severe distress to the disbelievers and a condition sort of like a mild cold for the believers. It is one of the major signs of the hour.
Okay, so you have the historical localized famine on one side and the end of the world on the other. But you mentioned a synthesis. How do you synthesize a historical famine with an apocalyptic event? Because they seem miles apart.
They do, but what is truly beautiful is how many modern Sunni theologians bring these two seemingly opposing views together. They posit that the Meccan famine, that localized historical smoke born of starvation, was actually a microcosm.
No, like a preview.
Yes, it was a localized preview of the greater apocalyptic smoke that is yet to come. The physical reality of the Meccans served as a spiritual warning to all of humanity. It's as if Allah is saying, if you want to know what the ultimate distress looks like, look at what happened to the arrogant elite of Mecca when they were stripped of all their worldly illusions.
Here's where it gets absolutely brilliant to me, looking at the rhetorical structure of this. Because right in the middle of this immediate desperation, right, while the Meccan elites are starving, chewing on bones, and looking up at this hazy, smoky sky, the Quran executes this masterful rhetorical pivot.
It really does.
Yeah, because the Meccans were incredibly arrogant about their custodianship of the Kaaba and their commercial supremacy. But the Quran doesn't just mock their current misery. It suddenly shifts gears and brings up the historical narrative of Moses or Musa and Pharaoh Fir'awn in Egypt. Why pivot to Egypt? Like, why bring them up right then?
It is just a masterstroke of rhetorical strategy, because you have to ask yourself, what was the Egyptian empire compared to the Quraysh?
Honestly, I mean, it's not even a fair comparison. The Quraysh were wealthy merchants, sure, but they were in a barren desert valley. They were essentially big fish in a very small, very dry pond. But Egypt was a global agricultural and architectural superpower.
Egypt was exponentially richer, exponentially more powerful. We are talking about a civilization with a centralized military, complex bureaucracy, and monumental architecture that quite literally still baffles modern engineers today.
Right, we still don't fully know how they built the pyramids.
Exactly. So by illustrating the sudden, unceremonious annihilation of this massive Egyptian empire, the Quran fundamentally subverts the Meccan elite's sense of invulnerability. It is telling them, look, you think your little tribal status and your caravan wealth make you untouchable. Look at what happened to a civilization that made you look like a speck of dust.
I was trying to think of a modern way to understand this. It's like trying to warn a local, arrogant millionaire.
Yeah.
Like the guy who thinks he's absolutely untouchable because he owns a dozen car dealerships in a mid-sized town.
Yeah, he's the big man in town.
Right, he thinks he runs the world. But instead of just threatening the car dealerships, you sit him down and show him the sudden, overnight, catastrophic collapse of a multi-trillion-dollar global empire. Like watching the Roman Empire or, the largest multinational tech conglomerate just vanish in a single afternoon.
It completely shatters the illusion.
Exactly. It shatters the illusion of invulnerability. It tells the local millionaire, hey, if they, with all their armies and trillions of dollars, could be wiped off the map without a trace, what possible chance do you have?
That is the exact psychological mechanism at play here. The famine was a localized warning that worldly wealth offers absolutely no immunity against the laws of divine justice.
Hmm.
And the story of Pharaoh reinforces that on a macro level. And this sets the stage perfectly for us to dive into the verses themselves, because starting at verse 25, the Quran meticulously dissects exactly what that collapse looks like, piece by piece.
Let's do it. Let's get right into the text itself. So verse 25 begins, how many were the gardens and springs they left behind? Now, obviously, we are talking about Pharaoh's people drowning in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
But how do the classical scholars interpret this specific opening?
This verse initiates a systematic deconstruction of materialistic delusion. And the genius of it starts with a single, highly potent word in Arabic, which is kam. It translates to how many.
But it's not a question, right? Like it's an interrogative exclamatory word.
Exactly. Classical exegetes like Al-Tabari and Al-Jalayn spend significant time explaining that kam here isn't asking for a literal mathematical count. You aren't supposed to say, oh, there were 40 gardens.
Right, it's not a census.
No, it is utilized to denote an innumerable, completely incomprehensible quantity. It's an expression of staggering magnitude. The Quran isn't saying, let's count Pharaoh's gardens. It's saying the sheer excess of Pharaoh's civilization totally defied human quantification. It was mind-boggling wealth.
And what specifically was left behind? Because the verse highlights gardens and springs. Why focus on agriculture first?
Ibn Kathir notes that the gardens, or Jannat, and springs, Uyun, refer directly to the fertile, life-giving ecosystem of the Nile River Valley. We really have to remember we are talking about an agrarian society here. In that historical context, control over water and fertile land was the ultimate metric of absolute power.
It wasn't just having gold in a vault somewhere.
No, it was the ability to grant or withhold the very means of life from millions of people.
Which feeds directly into Pharaoh's psychology, doesn't it? I mean, his entire claim to divinity was based on this specific real estate. He literally boasted about owning the rivers.
Yes, he did. The Quran actually records his incredible boast in Surah Ad-Dukhan. He stood before his people and proclaimed, "Does not the dominion of Egypt belong to me, and these rivers flowing beneath me?" His ego, his entire self-worth, and his literal claim to be a god were inextricably linked to his perceived ownership of that physical ecosystem.
That is wild.
But look at the insights we get from modern scholars like Yasir Qadi and Omar Suleiman. When they reflect on this dynamic, they point out the fundamental illusion of ownership that plagues all of human psychology, not just ancient tyrants.
Oh man, it's a really painful mirror to look into. Because we subconsciously assume permanence with the things we buy, don't we?
We absolutely do. Human beings spend decades cultivating our personal gardens. We build our investment portfolios. We acquire real estate. We renovate our kitchens. We obsess over the landscaping of our front lawns. And as we do this, we operate under this deeply flawed, unspoken assumption that we are permanent fixtures in these spaces.
Like we're going to be there forever to enjoy the kitchen remodel.
Right. But this verse, simply by stating they left behind, it highlights the violent, sudden separation that death brings. When the divine decree arrives, the individual is instantly severed from their assets.
The water keeps flowing, the flowers keep blooming, the stock market keeps trading.
Entirely indifferent to the absence of the one who claimed to own them. Pharaoh drowned and the Nile didn't skip a beat. The overarching legacy of material accumulation, according to verse 25, is ultimately one of sudden, unceremonious abandonment. You do not own the earth will eventually swallow you.
Wow, just wow. So we start with nature, right? The gardens and springs.
Yeah.
But then the Quran moves to human engineering. Verse 26 continues, and cornfields and noble buildings.
Right. Here, the focus shifts to human-engineered infrastructure to highlight the absolute totality of the empire's collapse. It wasn't just the natural resources they lost. It was everything they built with their own hands. And classical exegetes meticulously categorize the taxonomy of this abandoned wealth.
Break that taxonomy down for us. What do these specific terms represent in the broader context of an empire?
First, we have zuru, which is usually translated as crops or cornfields. But macroeconomically, this represents agricultural surplus. It is the economic stability, the trade leverage, the very engine of the empire's vast wealth. It signifies the macroeconomy of Egypt that allowed them to build their military and subjugate neighboring tribes.
Okay, so that's the base of the economy. And what about the
Yep.
buildings?
Then you have the phrase maqam kareem, which is beautifully translated as noble dwellings or noble buildings.
And what exactly falls under the umbrella of Maqam Kareem? Are we just talking about nice houses?
It's much bigger than that. Scholars like Mujahid, Sayyid ibn Jubayr, and al-Qurtubi interpret this as the majestic palaces, the grand pulpits, the towering architectural monuments, and the advanced engineering feats of the Egyptians. Al-Qurtubi and Al-Jalalain elaborate even further, noting that Maqam Kareem also denotes the intangible side of infrastructure.
Like what?
Positions of high social status, the castles of the elite, the physical manifestations of institutional power and bureaucracy.
Okay, so we are talking about the ultimate status symbols. In today's terms, this is the penthouses overlooking Central Park, the corner offices in massive skyscrapers, the private institutional fortresses. And when we look at this through a modern lens, it deeply questions the whole psychological trap of our legacy building culture.
It really exposes it.
Yeah, I mean, we spend 30 years paying off a mortgage, right? Dedicating the prime, healthy years of our lives to paying back a bank, convincing ourselves we own a piece of the earth. But verse 25 and 26 imply we are just temporary guests. We're just renters who will be evicted without a moment's notice.
It's a profound, humbling realization. Think about the pyramids and the great temples. Pharaoh built monumental structures explicitly designed to immortalize his legacy, to ensure his name lived forever carved in stone. He wanted to defeat death through architecture.
And did it work?
No. The Quran dismisses all of it in a few words as mere stage props left behind in an instant. And this brings in a very sharp socio-political lens, which is particularly noted by Sayyid Qutb in his extensive commentary, Fi Zilal al-Quran.
I was really hoping we would touch on his commentary here. What does Quaqbad say about these noble buildings? Because I know he usually has a very structural view of these things.
He does. He emphasizes that this verse is not just historical trivia, it is a direct threat to the systemic arrogance of any elite class throughout human history. The pharaohs constructed a society where the masses, specifically the children of Israel, were ruthlessly subjugated, enslaved, and oppressed solely to build these noble buildings for the ruling few.
Right, built on blood.
Exactly. What the suddenness of their drowning in the Red Sea demonstrates is that architectural and institutional legacies, when they are built upon the backs of the oppressed, are instantly rendered entirely useless in the court of divine justice. A beautiful building cannot protect you if its foundations are soaked in injustice.
That is incredibly powerful. So we've established what was left behind: the macroeconomy, the palaces, the fertile valleys. But verse 27, it shifts the lens entirely, doesn't it? It moves from the external world to the internal world. It asks, why didn't they see the end coming? What was their psychological state that made them so blind to their impending doom? Because verse 27 reads, and wealth, or comforts of life, wherein they had taken such delight.
Yes. To truly grasp the depth of this verse, we need to take a linguistic deep dive. This is a point heavily emphasized in the classical linguistic Tafsir tradition, and contemporary scholars like Numan Ali Khan frequently highlight this crucial nuance. It all revolves around the specific Arabic word chosen here. The Quran uses the word nama instead of the much more common word nima.
Okay, let's slow down and break down the difference there, because to an English speaker, those just sound like two slightly different ways of pronouncing the exact same word. What is the distinction?
It is a difference of a single vowel mark, but the theological difference is vast. So nima, with a kasra, a short I sound, generally refers to a divine blessing, a grace, or a favor bestowed by Allah. It implies a relationship. And the natural required response from a believer to a nima is shukr, gratitude, humility, and recognizing the ultimate source of the blessing.
Okay, so nima is a good thing, but the verse doesn't use nima. It deliberately uses nama.
Right. Nama with a fatha, a short I sound. This word does not denote a blessed favor. It denotes a state of extreme, intoxicating luxury, pure opulence, and a pampered lifestyle that invariably breeds arrogance, heedlessness, and rebellion against the divine. It is comfort entirely stripped of gratitude.
That is fascinating. So it's the difference between being deeply grateful for, say, a warm, comfortable home and a healthy family, versus living in such extravagant, mind-numbing excess that you forget you're even a mortal human being who relies on God.
Exactly. Fakhr al-Din al-Razi and al-Jalalain point out in their exegesis that the Egyptian elite were hopelessly steeped in nama. They were entirely consumed by their comforts. The Quran uses the descriptive word fakihin, which means they were living in a state of amused heedlessness.
Amused heedlessness, like they were just entertained to death.
That's a great way to put it. Syed Abu al-Maududi notes that this specific wording perfectly captures the psychological pathology of tyrants and the ultra-rich. Because they viewed their opulence as an inherent right, a result of their own brilliance or their bloodline rather than a divine trust and amana, they fell into the trap of self-deification.
They thought they deserved it because of who they were, not because it was given to them as a temporary test. And honestly, I feel like that mindset is everywhere today.
And that leads to one of the most terrifying, sobering concepts in all of Islamic theology, which is istidraj.
Okay, I've heard this term thrown around, but I need you to define istidraj for us clearly. What does it actually mean?
It is the concept of divine deception through gradual indulgence. Classical scholars like Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah frequently warned their students about this. They explained that a continuous, uninterrupted influx of worldly comfort, especially while a person is actively disobeying Allah, committing sins, or oppressing others, is not a sign of divine favor.
Wait, it's not?
No, it is actually the prelude to a catastrophic fall. God is giving them enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak.
But hold on, I really need to push back here. Because how is someone supposed to know the difference? If I get a promotion at work or if my business suddenly takes off and I'm making more money than ever, is that a blessing or a trap? That seems terrifyingly ambiguous. How do we know if we are in a state of istidraj?
That is the exact question the scholars ask. It's a very natural fear. And the metric they provided is actually quite simple. Look at your heart and your actions. When the wealth increases, does your humility and your worship increase?
I see.
Do you give more charity? Do you feel more need for Allah? If yes, it is a nima. But if the wealth increases and you become lazier with your prayers, harsher with your family, more arrogant, and you feel entirely secure in your sins, that is istidraj. The legacy of a life devoted solely to nama is complete spiritual bankruptcy. The Egyptian elite were so intoxicated by their nama that they were entirely blind to the impending divine decree. They thought their wealth meant God loved them.
That is chilling. It really is. It really makes you reflect on modern hustle culture and our endless, frantic pursuit of extreme luxury. I mean, we are bombarded with images of private jets, exotic vacations, and pure opulence. Are we spending our lives desperately chasing nama, striving for this intoxicating excess, mistakenly believing we are praying for nima?
It's a dangerous confusion.
We want the endless comforts, but we don't realize that continuous comfort without profound gratitude is an existential trap.
It's the illusion of ultimate success masking a cavernous spiritual void. And that realization perfectly transitions us to the consequence outlined in verse 28. Because if these oppressors are violently, suddenly removed from their intoxicating luxury, the natural, logical question is, what happens to all that accumulated wealth? What happens to the gardens, the massive palaces, the cornfields, and the bank accounts?
Yeah, where does it all go? Verse 28 gives us the brutal answer. It says, "Thus was their end, and we made other people inherit those things."
This simple verse establishes an unalterable theological principle known as istiklaf, which refers to divine succession or vicegerency on earth. It is a stark reminder to humanity that the earth and everything on it belongs exclusively to Allah. He is al-warith, the ultimate inheritor.
So we own nothing.
Nothing. All human beings, no matter how rich or powerful, are merely temporary custodians. We are middlemen, and our tenures can be revoked instantly.
The phrasing there, "and we made other people inherit," it sounds so casual, almost effortless. There's no cosmic struggle mentioned at all.
Because there is no struggle for the divine, Al-Tabari and Al-Jalalain elucidate this beautifully. They explain that this phrase demonstrates the effortless nature by which Allah transfers global superpowers. The oppressor is extinguished in an instant, literally a single wave in the Red Sea, and the oppressed, or a completely different nation entirely, is instantaneously granted dominion over everything the oppressor spent centuries building.
Maududi brings a really interesting socio-political commentary to this as well, doesn't he? Regarding the specific humiliation of the tyrant in this process.
Yes, he does. Maududi points out that the ultimate humiliation for the oppressor is embedded right in the transfer of assets. Think about the psychology here. A tyrant violently hoards wealth, crushes the masses, starves the poor, and builds a massive empire solely to maintain his supremacy and keep others down. But upon their fall, all those hoarded assets are seamlessly, effortlessly handed over to the very people they despised and oppressed. The legacy of the oppressor literally becomes the foundational wealth of the oppressed.
I want to stretch an analogy here. It's like a ruthless CEO of a massive corporation. You know the type. The kind of guy who spends 40 years stepping on people, ruining careers, underpaying staff, all just to build his untouchable corporate empire. Then, one day, the board discovers massive fraud. He's unceremoniously escorted out of the building by security in front of everyone, and within 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, someone else, maybe someone he aggressively passed over for a promotion, is sitting in his leather chair, drinking from his custom coffee mug and running his company. The universe just moves on without a single hiccup.
That analogy captures the abruptness perfectly. The chair doesn't care who sits in it. Now, within the classical scholarship regarding this specific historical event in Egypt, there is a really fascinating debate, a historical data gap, if you will, about exactly who inherited Pharaoh's wealth.
Right, who exactly were the other people mentioned in the verse? Because, the story usually ends with the Israelites crossing the sea, not moving back into Pharaoh's palaces.
Exactly, and there are two main hypotheses among the scholars here. The first is the return to Egypt hypothesis. Some scholars, taking the apparent literal meaning of the text, suggest that the children of Israel, Bani Israel, physically returned to Egypt after the drowning of Pharaoh to reclaim and inherit those specific gardens, springs, and palaces that they were once enslaved to build.
There's a strong counter-argument to that based on history, right?
A very strong one. Scholars like the great historian and exegete Ibn Kathir argue the Levantine inheritance hypothesis. Ibn Kathir notes that there is a severe lack of robust historical or scriptural evidence indicating that the Israelites ever returned to settle en masse in Egypt after the Exodus. In fact, their entire journey was directed toward the Holy Land.
They were heading away from Egypt.
Exactly. So instead, he and others argue that the inheritance refers generally to the Israelites inheriting similar gardens and springs in the Levant, in Sham. Or, alternatively, that the specific physical wealth of Egypt was inherited by entirely different subsequent nations, like the remaining Copts or foreign conquerors who swept in after the military was destroyed.
But honestly, looking at it, the historical debate almost doesn't matter, right? Like, who cares if it was the Israelites or the Copts who moved in? The core theological lesson remains absolute.
You're exactly right. Regardless of who specifically moved their belongings into those palaces, the theological lesson is perfectly intact. Worldly empires are transient, power shifts effortlessly at the divine decree, and the ultimate inheritor of all creation is Allah. The illusion of permanent ownership is shattered either way.
So we've seen the massive power shift. We've seen the wealth handed over to strangers in an instant. And this leads us to what I consider the absolute emotional and theological climax of the text. Verse 29. Because if power shifts so easily, if you can be replaced in your corner office in 5 minutes flat, the deepest existential question a human can ask is, does anyone actually care when you're gone? Verse 29 reads, and neither heaven nor earth shed a tear over them, nor were they given a respite again. This verse is arguably one of the most stunning, sobering statements of ultimate irrelevance in the entire Quranic text. I mean, we just spent all this time discussing Pharaoh's massive monuments, his self-proclaimed divinity, his absolute terrestrial dominance, yet his violent demise and the destruction of his entire elite army elicited zero mourning from the cosmos. Total cosmic silence, not a single tear.
Neither heaven nor earth shed a tear. The imagery is incredibly poetic, but I have to admit, I'm struggling with it. How do the classical scholars interpret this? Are we talking literally like the physical sky crying, or is this just a beautiful metaphorical way of saying nobody missed them? That is the exact debate among the classical Sunni exegetes, and it is fascinating. Let's look at the literal interpretation first, which represents the Athari methodology. This was the predominant view among the early generations, the Salaf, and it is meticulously recorded and supported by heavyweights like Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, and Al-Qurtubi. They argue that the heavens and the earth literally weep.
Wait, literally? Not just poetic personification, because I always thought of that as pure poetry. You're saying the actual atmosphere and the dirt cry.
Not poetry. They view this as a metaphysical reality grounded in the deep Islamic understanding of a conscious, worshipful universe. And this view isn't just speculative, it is anchored in highly authentic hadith literature. For example, there is a profound hadith reported by the companion Sayyidina Anas bin Malik. He reported that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stated, "For every person there are 2 gates in the heaven. Through one of them his sustenance descends, and through the other his deeds and his conversation ascend. When he dies, the gates remember him and weep."
Wow, so there's an actual spatial physical connection between the individual human being and the unseen structure of the heavens.
Yes, there is. And Sayyidina Ibn Abbas, the great scholar of the companions, and Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib explicitly affirmed this reality. There's a famous account where a man came to Ibn Abbas and asked him point blank exactly what you just asked me. He said, "Do the heavens and the earth actually weep for anyone?" And Ibn Abbas replied affirmatively.
How did he explain the mechanism of that weeping? Because that's the part my modern brain gets stuck on.
He explained that the earth literally weeps for the specific physical space, the musalla, where a believer used to prostrate, where they performed sujud and righteous deeds. That physical patch of dirt, that carpet in your living room, misses the weight of your forehead praising Allah. It felt honored by your worship. Similarly, the specific gate in the heavens through which the believer's daily good deeds ascended feels a profound void, and it weeps upon the cessation of those ascending deeds. When the believer dies, the traffic of light stops and the gate grieves.
And tying that back to Pharaoh and his army?
Pharaoh and his troops possessed no record of righteous deeds ascending to the heavens. Their gate was dark. They had no place on earth where they genuinely prostrated in submission to Allah. Therefore, neither domain felt any loss upon their violent destruction. They left zero spiritual footprint, so there were no tears. The universe felt absolutely nothing for them.
That literal interpretation just leaves you in genuine awe. I mean, it completely shatters the modern secular view of the world. We think of the earth as just dirt, rock, and tectonic plates, and the sky is just empty space and atmospheric gases. But this implies we are walking on a conscious feeling surface that physically records our actions. The places where we quietly stand and pray actually mourn our absence when we die. That fundamentally changes how you walk through a room. It changes how you view a quiet corner in your house.
It completely shifts your spatial awareness. You are never truly alone. Your environment is interacting with your soul. Now, there is the second perspective in the classical tradition, which is the metaphorical or majazi interpretation. Rationalist theologians and linguistic exegetes, such as early Fakhr al-Din al-Razi and al-Zamakhshari, offer this view. They analyze the verse through the lens of advanced Arabic rhetoric, specifically a concept called lisan al-hal.
Meaning the language of the state or the language of the situation.
Correct. They argue that inanimate objects lack the biological and psychological mechanisms for grief. In their view, the weeping is a powerful rhetorical device meant to emphasize that Pharaoh's existence was an absolute blight on the universe. Al-Qurtubi and Al-Jalalain note that this expression highlights how the universe was actively relieved of their evil. The total absence of weeping signifies a complete lack of cosmic grief. They went to their doom unwept, unhonored, and unsung by any creature.
So it's basically saying nobody cared that you died. The universe didn't even flinch. But aren't these two views, the literal conscious universe and the rhetorical metaphor, aren't they mutually exclusive? Do we have to pick one?
Not necessarily, and this is where modern scholarship really shines. Modern exegesis, such as the Ma'rif ul-Quran, elegantly synthesizes these views. They assert that there is no need to discard the literal meaning in favor of the metaphorical. Because think about it, contemporary quantum physics and ecological science are increasingly revealing the profound, unseen interconnectedness of the cosmos. Furthermore, foundational Islamic theology dictates that every single atom of the universe acts in submission to the divine. This is the concept of tasbih, cosmic glorification. Everything from a grain of sand to a quasar is praising Allah in a way we just don't understand.
So the universe operates in a constant humming state of harmony and worship.
Yes. And when a tyrant like Pharaoh disrupts that moral and physical harmony through systemic oppression, bloodshed, and arrogance, the cosmos feels the disruption. It is a dissonance in the symphony of worship. When that tyrant is suddenly removed, the cosmos feels no sorrow. It feels profound relief. So the ultimate life lesson embedded in verse 29 is that a person's true, lasting value is measured strictly by their spiritual integration into the universe's worship of the Creator, not by the concrete they poured.
Okay, this brings us to the crucial pivot of this deep dive. Because if material wealth, the gardens, the noble buildings, the intoxicating luxury, if all of that guarantees absolutely nothing but cosmic indifference, how do we build a legacy that the heavens and earth will actually weep for? To figure that out, we need to look to the giants of classical Islamic thought. We need a completely new paradigm.
Indeed we do. If we want to understand the paradigm of true legacy, the spiritual footprint, we turn to scholars who didn't just write about these concepts, but they lived and breathed them under extreme duress. Let's start with Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah.
Ibn Taymiyyah is such a fascinating figure because he lived through immense political turbulence and persecution himself. He had a very powerful view on the illusion of worldly attachment, didn't he?
He did. He posited that the root of Pharaoh's destruction, which is also the primary disease of the modern human condition, is an improper idolatrous attachment to the dunya, the temporal world. Ibn Taymiyyah argued that true power, and consequently a true lasting legacy, resides entirely internally. If your legacy is external, it can be confiscated, destroyed, or flooded. If it is internal, it cannot be touched.
And he proved this with his own life. We have to talk about his famous prison declaration.
It is one of the most powerful statements of spiritual resilience in all of Islamic history. Ibn Taymiyyah was imprisoned multiple times for his uncompromising theological stances. During one of his final imprisonments in the citadel of Damascus, a time when most men would absolutely despair over the loss of their freedom, their social status, and their worldly legacy, he famously declared, "What can my enemies do to me? My paradise and my garden are in my heart wherever I go. They are with me and never leave me. If I am imprisoned, it is seclusion for worship. If I am killed, it is martyrdom. If they expel me from my land, it is tourism."
My garden is in my heart. I want everyone listening to contrast that directly with Pharaoh's gardens in verse 25. Pharaoh literally owned the physical Nile Valley, the greatest ecosystem on earth, and it was violently, effortlessly stripped from him. Ibn Taymiyyah owned absolutely nothing materially while locked in a stone dungeon, yet he possessed an invincible internal legacy.
A legacy that continues to influence millions of people centuries later. His books are read across the globe today. He showed that a person leaves a lasting legacy when their heart is attached to the eternal creator rather than the fading, temporary creation. Pharaoh's ultimate failure was his attempt to engineer permanence in a realm that is inherently designed to expire. Ibn Taymiyyah invested in the eternal realm.
Let's move to Ibn Taymiyyah's most famous student, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He was a master of the diseases of the heart, and he wrote extensively about the internal void in the human soul.
Yes, in his seminal work, Madarij al-Salikin, Ibn Qayyim analyzes the intense psychological torment of living a life detached from Allah, the torment of leaving behind an empty legacy. He notes a profound psychological reality. Within every human heart exists an innate void, a state of anxiety, a desolate, scattered feeling. And here is the key insight. That specific void cannot be filled by any amount of worldly wealth, status, likes on social media, or real estate. It can only be filled by intimacy with and love for Allah.
So chasing the nama, the intoxicating luxury we discussed earlier, is essentially just a futile, desperate attempt to fill a massive spiritual hole with physical stuff. It's like trying to cure hunger by just reading a menu.
Precisely. You will never be satisfied. And when analyzing the ultimate demise of those who chased material wealth at the expense of their souls, Ibn Qayyim stated something profoundly beautiful. He said, "A tear that runs down a believer's cheek is more beneficial than 1,000 raindrops on the earth."
A tear of sincere repentance over 1,000 raindrops of agricultural wealth, that completely flips the script on what is actually valuable.
Yes. The legacy of a believer is built through those private, unseen tears, through patience during crushing trials, and absolute unwavering reliance on the divine. Pharaoh left behind physical palaces that crumbled to dust and just became tourist attractions. A believer leaves behind a purified heart, a qalb salim, and an unseen record of sincere worship. That is what the heavens and earth actually recognize. That is what they mourn.
It's all about the unseen actions, the things nobody claps for. And that brings us to Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, who really focused on the practical, daily cultivation of this legacy. How do we do it day to day?
Right. In his masterful work, Lataif al-Marif, Ibn Rajab translates these lofty eschatological concepts into highly practical daily routines. He explores how the early generations, the Salaf, actively utilized the passage of time to build their spiritual legacy. They didn't just let time pass, they harvested it.
Like his perspective on the season of winter? I read this in the notes and I found it absolutely fascinating.
It's a beautiful framing that changes how you view the entire year. Ibn Rajab details how early believers viewed winter not as a gloomy, depressing season to be endured, but as a massive prize, or ganima. Why? Because the short, cold days allowed for easy fasting without severe thirst or exhaustion, and the long, dark nights provided ample quiet time for extensive qiyam al-layl, the voluntary night prayers, while the rest of the world slept.
They saw the planetary rotation, the actual physical tilt of the Earth, as a strategic advantage for building their legacy. They were hacking the seasons for spiritual growth. And he tells an incredibly powerful story about the companion Mu'adh bin Jabal on his deathbed to illustrate this.
Yes, it is a very moving, jarring account. When Mu'adh bin Jabal, one of the most knowledgeable companions of the Prophet, was on his deathbed, he began to weep profusely. But he wasn't weeping over leaving behind wealth or his estate or his status. He wasn't even weeping out of fear of death. He wept because he realized he would miss the intense thirst experience while fasting on the scorching hot summer days, and he would miss the freezing nights spent standing in prayer during the winter.
He was grieving the loss of his ability to worship. He was sad he couldn't push himself for Allah anymore.
Exactly. Ibn Rajab highlights through the story that a true legacy is built in the quiet, unseen, physically vulnerable moments of life. The tears shed in the darkness of the night when nobody is watching. Literally water an unseen garden in the grave. If you want to avoid the terrifying fate of the unwept tyrants in Surah Ad-Dukhan, you must actively cultivate actions that benefit your soul in the dark.
And finally, let's look at al-Dahabi and what we can call the biographical legacy, because how you treat people is a massive part of this.
Absolutely. Al-Hafiz al-Dahabi, in his monumental biographical encyclopedia Siyar A'lam an-Nubala, emphasizes that a person's ultimate historical legacy is recorded in their character, their humility, and their taqwa, their deep consciousness and fear of Allah. He recounts an incredible defining incident involving the great foundational jurist Imam Abu Hanifa. A man, just a regular person, approached Abu Hanifa and simply said to him, "Fear Allah."
Now, context is super important here. Abu Hanifa was an absolute giant,
Yeah.
a man of immense social status, wealth, and unparalleled scholarly knowledge. He had thousands of students.
He was a titan of his era. And how do powerful men usually react when challenged or admonished by a commoner? Usually with intense arrogance, defensiveness, or anger. "Do you know who I am?" But Abu Hanifa didn't react like Pharaoh. When told to fear Allah, Abu Hanifa didn't defend his ego. He began to tremble physically. He turned pale. He lowered his head in utter humility, and he replied to the man, "May Allah reward you with good."
The unifying theme among all these scholars is so clear, and it is so contrary to what we are taught today. True legacy is built in the dark. It's built in quiet, unseen, vulnerable moments. It is forged in the humility of trembling before the divine when corrected, not in erecting massive public monuments, accumulating followers, or running slick PR campaigns to ensure everyone knows your name.
A true legacy is not forged by demanding submission from others, as Pharaoh did, but by demonstrating absolute ego-crushing submission to the Creator. The angels, the earth, and the heavens weep for those whose biographies are defined by that trembling awe and gentle character.
So bringing all this incredible classical wisdom to the immediate present. For you, the listener, navigating your life right now, how do we practically ensure we fall into the right category? When you leave this earth, will you be missed by the heavens and the earth?
Well, in modern Islamic discourse, scholars synthesize all these classical tafsir points into actionable life lessons. And the prophetic tradition gives us a very stark binary dichotomy regarding the two types of departures from this world. Every single human being will fall into one of these two categories.
Tell us about the profound remark the prophet made at this funeral procession.
Right, so a funeral procession, a janazah, was passing by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions. Observing it, he made a brief but earth-shattering statement that really summarizes everything we've discussed today. He said, either he is relieved from the world or the world is relieved from him.
Let's break those two categories down because they are heavy, relieved from the world.
This is the departure of the sincere believer. The believer is finally relieved from the constant hardships, the painful trials, the physical diseases, the grief, and the exhausting spiritual struggle of the temporal world. They are finally transitioning into the mercy, peace, and eternal rest of the hereafter. Their long, hard shift is over. They get to rest.
And then there is the terrifying alternative. The world is relieved from him.
This is the oppressor, the tyrant, the arrogant, the unrepentant sinner who spread harm. When they die, the world, and this explicitly includes other human beings, the environment, the trees, the animals, is physically and spiritually relieved to finally be freed from their wickedness, their corruption, and their daily harm. Verses 25 to 29 of Ad-Dukhan perfectly illustrate this exact category. The earth and the heavens breathed a massive sigh of relief when Pharaoh drowned. The nightmare was over.
So the hard, uncomfortable question we have to ask ourselves today is, if I were to pass away tomorrow, would my community, my family, my environment feel a profound sense of loss? Or would they feel a secret, unspoken sense of relief? If someone's legacy is characterized by harshness, corporate greed, emotional abuse, taking up space without giving back, their departure will be met with the exact same cosmic silence as Pharaoh's. People might show up to the funeral at a social obligation, but the earth will not weep.
Which is why we must actively, consciously cultivate a beneficent footprint, known in Islam as sadaqah jariyah, or continuous flowing charity. If we want the heavens and the earth to weep for us, we must consciously leave a legacy of continuous benefit that outlives our physical bodies.
Detail the mechanisms of that footprint. How do we practically do it?
It generally falls into a few key categories. First, the physical or material legacy. This involves digging a water well in a deprived area, planting a fruit-bearing tree, feeding the hungry, or providing shelter for widows and orphans. The beautiful mechanism of action here is that every single human, animal, or bird that benefits from that charity or eats from that tree serves as a continuous testament to your legacy. They generate ongoing reward for you even while you are asleep in the grave.
Then there is the spiritual and intellectual legacy, which is just as important.
Yes. Raising righteous children who pray for you, building or supporting a mosque, spreading beneficial knowledge through writing or teaching. The spiritual footprint remains active long after physical demise. There is a breathtaking hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud that states that when a person teaches goodness, the angels, the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth, and even the ants in their holes and the fish in the depths of the sea seek forgiveness for that teacher. Wait, even the fish in the sea? That ties perfectly back to the conscious universe. The fish in the ocean are making dua for the person who teaches good. Bringing it down to the micro level of our daily community, I want to emphasize that you don't need to be a multimillionaire building a massive marble Islamic center to achieve this. It's about the daily, seemingly insignificant interactions. It's about being the person who checks on the elderly neighbor when it snows, the person who smiles and genuinely says, "Assalamu alaikum" to the cashier at the supermarket, the person who provides a kind, non-judgmental listening ear to a friend in distress. Will the local mosque notice that your vacuuming on Friday mornings is gone? Will your family miss your unprompted text just checking in on them? Will the stray cats in your neighborhood miss the bowl of food you left out on your porch?
Exactly. The ultimate divine metric of a successful life is not the accumulation of personal gardens, springs, and luxury cars.
Yeah.
It is the cultivation of a profound, positive void that is intimately and painfully felt by your community, your environment, and the cosmos upon your departure. That is the massive paradigm shift from this deep dive, the transition from selfish acquisition to selfless contribution. We must ensure that when we depart, our absence leaves a profound, positive void. We want to be missed by the angels.
It demands an entirely new definition of what it means to be successful.
And before we close, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. We spend so much time today curating what we can call our digital ghost. Our perfectly filtered photos, our clever tweets, our meticulously crafted LinkedIn profiles. We pour hours into a digital footprint that will sit on a server in a desert long after we die, completely dead, cold, and entirely indifferent to us. What if instead we spent a fraction of that time curating our spiritual ghost, the lingering warmth in a room after we leave it, the echo of our character in the hearts of our children? Because the servers won't weep when you're gone, but the sky above you just might.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us. Connect with us. Join our growing family on this sacred journey of Islamic knowledge.
Please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us spread this message of peace and beauty further.
May Allah grant us all the steadfastness to follow the path of truth, increase our knowledge, and accept our humble deeds. Ameen.
May the message of peace, tolerance, and harmony of Islam reach every heart.